Hello, everyone. For the first time in history, Israel has officially attacked Iran. There have up until now been clandestine attacks between the two countries over the years. However, this is the first time that the IDF has carried out open airstrikes targeting Iranian sites, reportedly in retaliation for Iran's ballistic missile strike that occurred against Israel on October 1st. What follows is an interview and analysis that was conducted in the first 2 hours of this airstrike, discussing the possible implications, analyzing the different targets that were being struck, and trying to figure out what is the trajectory of this escalation. I hope you find this informative. Let me know if you have any questions or comments in the comment section below.
Al, I want to bring in Alon Burstein. He's a Tufts University visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow. As always, Alon, it's good to see you. Your initial reaction to what little we know about this developing situation.
So it's good to see you, Austin, and good to see you also, Hal. Look, we don't know a lot so far about what is actually happening, but the initial reports started with explosions that occurred in Tehran. Then there were reports of explosions that were occurring in several other cities in Iran, some of them quite important and interesting when it comes to what might be targeted in this initial attack. Then, and this I think may be a critical point, we started to see reports of explosions that are occurring, very likely targeting Iranian interests across the Middle East. We have seen reports in Syria, we've seen in Damascus, we've seen in several different places in Al-Khalib and other things. There's also a report just came out of Summaries News, which is one of the news networks of the Iraqi militias, saying that there are explosions that are occurring in Iraq. Why I say that's instrumental is actually not because, oh, look, Israel maybe is targeting all of Iran's interests. Actually, on the contrary, it may very well be that because Israel is targeting other Iranian interests in the Middle East, we're actually going to see less of an attack on Iran itself. There's going to be attacks that occur in Iran, but it's not going to be Israel throwing its full force, full weight against Iran. Instead, it's going to be a show of force in Iran itself. But the bulk of the attack could be against the Iranian interests as a way to say we've hit back and now we can spiral down, as opposed to we're now escalating. Again, very initial, obviously, but that's my initial thoughts when I saw that there's explosions happening in Syria and Iraq also.
And Alon, obviously the goal here, this is something we've already been speaking about with Hal and Joe, but the ultimate goal here is to have a response, but to not drag this on any longer than it needs to, correct?
Look, it's hard to say. It's hard to say because there are a lot of elements within the cabinet in Israel that are saying now is the time to strike. Iran, for years, has built up its capabilities with Hezbollah, with Katib Hezbollah in Iraq and in Syria, with the Houthis in Yemen, with Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And right now, almost ironically, as a result of October 7th and the war, all of those proxies have already been on the defensive. Israel's engaged with all of them. So the big threat that Iran has tried to develop over the years, saying we're untouchable because if you touch us, we flip a switch and the entire Middle East can go up in flames, targeting U.S. interests, targeting Israel. The majority of the Middle East has gone up in flames in terms of targeting Israel and targeting U.S. interests. So there are a lot of voices within Israel's cabinet, I remind you, it's a very hawkish right-wing cabinet, that are saying, no, now is the time to escalate. Now is the time. Netanyahu for years has been talking about the Iranian threat, the nuclear threat at the UN, at every possible forum. Okay, now you have the time. Now you have the opportunity. Now you go and carry out the strike. So it is possible. I would not be surprised if there are elements who are thinking, no, actually Israel intends to escalate the situation. And there's, of course, other considerations that are much more cynically political. But I'm saying even if we just look at it from the military perspective, it could be that Israel will be seeking to escalate. It's also important to remember that Iran itself, and almost directly from the supreme leader, Khamenei, sent messages to different Arab countries in the region in the last several weeks and said, if Israel does not escalate this further, if the retaliation is more moderate or more contained, we will consider this round closed. We can consider this round, we attacked, you attacked, kind of like what we saw in April. Which is, again, maybe, very, very maybe, why Israel would be targeting also Iranian interests in other countries and not throwing its full weight against Iran itself.
So Hal, what do we make of the timing of this attack? We know that there were some leaked documents. this is the overnight hours, which I believe is something that we've become accustomed to. These major events always seem to happen in the overnight hours in the Middle East. But it does appear, at least because of that document leak, that this retaliation was delayed, correct?
All reports are that, yes, it was delayed. And of course, part of that was, and look, I may have been involved with planning a few strike missions in the past, and I will tell you that you prefer to strike at night, undercover darkness. First off, it makes it more difficult to see your aircraft at night, particularly if you're employing stealth capabilities with your aircraft. The other part is it has a tremendous psychological disadvantage for whomever you're striking. Most people sleep at night, and so it causes them to wake up. It causes, usually they have less people on duty at night. So there's a lot of reasons why you would strike under cover of darkness. And that I don't really read much into that. If I was to say, when will they strike? I would say, 90% chance they'll strike at night, 10% they'll strike during the day. And even then I would caveat that other 10% to say they'll probably strike at night anyway. So they did that. And that makes the most sense. It's interesting. Alon is absolutely correct. This could go either way. It could be a kind of a big strike, and that would make sense, hitting some of these other proxies to basically send them a message or a statement that, yes, we will hit you. And I don't know what they hit already, but it may have been in such a way that it made it sent a more profound message to some of them than they were ready for. So that would make a lot of sense. I also kind of think that if they were doing a circuitous route with the airstrikes and possibly running up through Syria and Iraq to get to Iran, which is possible, particularly with some of the things that were discussed some of the things that Iran told some of the regional countries like Saudi Arabia and certainly Jordan and others that they would do. That is an option that Israel could have looked at, and they may have been basically clearing the route. So while they're flying over this, they're basically clearing air defense capabilities along the way of their main strike mission forces on their way to Iran. So that's also a possibility that I wouldn't completely rule out. But I do think that one of the things that with this strike mission, from what we know of it, is that they hit some key command and control targets. The sort of things that I'm hearing, and certainly what Alon was talking about, it kind of indicates to me they went after some command, control, communications, leadership targets, possibly like an IRGC headquarters in Tehran or something along those lines, that was the message. And they went into Tehran. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And I'm curious to see what those strikes in Tehran look like. What aircraft they used, what they hit it with. That really goes to it. And I'm going to kind of leave with this. I'm not sure, but look, the Iranian regime is deeply unpopular in Iran, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has already reached out to the Iranian people, to express his feelings about the regime, if you will, and entreaty, if you will, and with that, there is a way to do strikes in such a way that could really unbalance the regime, take out some of their pillars of power, if you will, in certain ways. So I'm not so sure, and I defer to Alon's insight on this, but there are those elements within the cabinet, certainly, that would say, look, this is a chance, this is an opportunity, and they may be looking at something a little bit more decisive with the Iranian threat. I don't rule that out. I don't think you're going to get that one big strike mission in one night. You're going to have to do multiple strike missions over multiple nights in order to pull that off. But that is something that certainly they would have talked about. Whether or not that's the plan, I don't know. But I would be surprised if that wasn't one of the courses of action that they looked at some point during their strike planning.
Yeah, Alon, talk to us about the spectrum of opinion within the Israeli top leadership. I mean, and I should also mention what we just had on our screen a moment ago, the PMO releasing an image of Netanyahu, Gallant, and military officials at the IDF's underground headquarters amid the strikes on Iran. Tell us a little bit about what we've been hearing about how Israel has been discussing carrying this out
So before I jump into that, I just want to say there's been a news flash from the Faras. That's like the main news agency in Iran, and obviously has to be taken very much with a grain of salt. And often it's the state-run media. What they are reporting is that from an initial, if we translate from an initial inspection, several military bases in the west and southwestern areas of Tehran were subject to an Israeli attack. So the official state media in Iran is saying that the attack targeted military bases. Again, and they're not reporting if there's any hits or casualties or things like that. At this point, they're unlikely to do that, even if that does happen, unless they want to justify a retaliation. And before I answer your question, I just want to say one more thing about the different cities where there have been reports that explosions have occurred. One of them is Isfahan. Isfahan is an area in Nantaz where Israel carried out, or reportedly, Israel carried out its strike in April. There is a nuclear facility there. In April, they targeted the air defense systems. So very likely that is a main center that Israel will be targeting. Another interesting site is Karaj. Karaj is an area near Tehran where there was already an attack that occurred, explosions occurred in 2021. And then it was said that there was a drone that attacked some sort of nuclear factory. Again, this was all very secretive. No one claimed responsibility. And later on, Iran actually said that one of their nuclear sites had been targeted. So again, in Karaj, there appears to be a nuclear site which in the past has been targeted. And again, targeting a nuclear site does not mean attacking Iran's nuclear capabilities. It is very unlikely that Israel is going to attack Iran's nuclear capabilities after pretty much explicitly being told not to by the United States. Israel is dependent on the United States to support it in the event of this escalation. So at the same time, it could be that attacks against the military bases that are around nuclear facilities or attacks against the air defenses, as Hal was saying before. It seems that you're going after specific strategic targets in order to maybe lay the path for if this escalates further to show your capabilities or things like that. Very likely just the array that has been attacked in Iran itself is indicating that there's a message being sent specifically around the nuclear sites, even if attacks are not targeting the nuclear sites directly. But again, as I keep on saying, that's speculation based on what's essentially civilians in Iran are reporting where explosions are. I'll just address your question pretty quickly about the array of different opinions within Israel. The Israeli cabinet is made up of an array of different parties. Essentially, Prime Minister Netanyahu has, throughout the war, on the one hand, driven the idea that the war has to continue towards this, sort of abstract total victory, which many have said just means the war goes on forever. At the same time, he's also been quite cautious about not authorizing or approving things like the general's plan, at least not publicly, things like, resettlement in the Gaza Strip or things like that. So he's said, the war needs to go on until some sort of total victory, but also not seeking to have permanent presence in the Gaza Strip, have a permanent presence in Lebanon, or escalate things beyond, into perpetual war. In his cabinet, however, there are other elements, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, who themselves are from parties who do aspire for visions of what's known as Greater Israel, expanding Israel's borders, resettlement in the Gaza Strip. There's even a movement that is affiliated with some of these parties that has started to develop a settlement plan for southern Lebanon. So those obviously are people who are saying, no, Israel has to survive on its sword, so to speak. It has to be prepared for war. It's in a very hostile environment. Those parties are also quite blatantly racist against Arabs. Therefore, if you have a chance to strike at the evil as far as they're concerned in the Middle East, now is the time. An interesting figure in that is seen in this picture, Yoav Gallant. Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister, ironically, despite being the defense minister and the person in charge of the military, has actually been one of the more moderating voices within the Israeli government, because he has constantly said the military has to be activated, but there has to be a coherent strategy. He's the one that's been calling from day one for Israel to develop an exit strategy from Gaza, to develop a day after plan. So the fact that this attack is being, sort of orchestrated right now by Netanyahu and Gallant also may tell us something about the extent to which it's going to spiral and escalate, because when it comes down to it, after all the cabinet debates, they are the two who are going to make the decisions.
Al, what kind of conversations are going on in a room like the one we're looking at right now?
Well, there are, obviously the plan is in place. They're already executing, so there's no planning that's going on there. What they're talking about is probably next steps. A lot of things that you plan next. Some things will be kind of fixed, but some things won't be completely fixed, because what you want to know is, what is your battle damage assessment? What did you accomplish? Do we need to launch a follow-up strike to eliminate that target? And there's a lot that goes into that. I can tell you that one of the challenges is you have you have to look at a lot of other sources of intelligence, not just the pilots will tell you something. I mean, the strike mission, the folks on the strike mission will tell you something. But if you've done anything working with airstrikes and working with pilots, historically they always seem to have more effect on target than we found out they did later on. So we always like to confirm that with other sources that can actually go in there and see what was the actual effect. Because when you're whizzing by a target fairly fast, you can see things, but you can't make a full assessment like we can if we take an image from a satellite or something else, an hour later, where we get a better idea of what exactly was destroyed or not destroyed. So that's part of the discussion here, which is, do we need to conduct what would sometimes be called branches or sequels? Which is, this would be the next phase, a sequel of what we just did. This is a branch plan we have to go off in other directions should conditions set themselves, and we should pursue that. That would be the essence of the discussion here, would be, and because of the audience is all military, I would imagine that the political factors, except for the international political factors, such as, well, what will the Saudis do, or what will the Jordanians do, or what should we expect from the Syrians, or something like that? That would certainly be part of a discussion like that. But internal domestic politics would probably not be a big part of this discussion, simply because of the individuals who are right around the table. I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying I would be surprised if with this particular group they would talk about that. You really want to focus on the military side of this and the military objectives, and which way to go now that this is done. And of course, a lot of this, hey, this is dangerous business. Warfighting is when they say go into harm's way, it's not just a phrase. That's what it is. So there's always the possibility that there could have been friendly losses incurred in these strike missions. And if that did happen, I'm sure that would be a big part of the discussion as well.
So Alon, don't be shy about chiming in. If you do have anything that's coming across your plate, that's one of the reasons why we love Alon. He can read all of these different sources in real time, and sometimes they're not in English, and that's sometimes how we get.
So the only thing.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm about to say the only thing is that Sky News in Arabic is reporting that one of the targets that the IDF attacked in Iran is a military base for launching ballistic missiles, which again may tell us something.
Yep.
If the attack that Iran carried out wide was so much more escalatory than the attack in April, was using ballistic missiles, and then the retaliation is against a base that's used to fire ballistic missiles, that's a signal. You and I have talked countless times about the tacit signals that go between. That's a signal to say we're within the circle of this retaliation. We're not now taking it towards, and we're going to attack the government buildings in Iran, and we're going to something. That's like, say you attacked with this, and FYI, we're going to destroy that. Like that's within the game of sending a message. This is not us now escalating to a much higher level. You attack with ballistic missiles, we're destroying your ballistic missiles. That's again from the initial report there.
Your reaction, Hal?
I was going to say that's it's very, very much quid pro quo, which is, this is what you hit us with, so we're going to take out your ability to do that. And that's kind of what I've been expecting. I would have been actually surprised if Israel did something where they did not attack the ballistic missile capability. I kind of assumed that would be in all their planning efforts, that would be one of the things that they would always look at, is we want to hit their ballistic missiles. Now, one of the things I will be curious to see is what they did about their drone capability, and whether they may have hit one of the drone manufacturing facilities in Iran. That's interesting. because that sends a very, very different strategic message. First off, it says, quit sending drones our direction, which I think is a pretty reasonable message to send. And then the other one is it also limits what they can send to places like Russia. And I think if we hear that one of the larger drone manufacturing capabilities was taken out, or wherever they keep drones was taken out, there's some inferences we can make from that. Again, at this point, we don't know. There's no reports on that. But I think ballistic missiles makes absolute perfect sense. And I really do think that, and I think Alon put it very clearly that, we have reports, initial reports, obviously, that they hit some places where they're, at least one of them has a nuclear facility there. And they don't necessarily have to hit the nuclear facility. Let me just put it this way. If you take out all the air defense around the nuclear facility, you've definitely made a message as to, we're wide open now. And so if they do escalate, that's a message for the counterstrike, for the response, which is we've now left you completely defenseless in this strategic site. So that's a message to Khomeini. That's a message to the IRGC. It's a message to the regime, which is if you want to bump this up one more level, this is where you are now. And that should hopefully have some sort of sobering effect on some of the thinking, the dialogue within the regime on what their next step is.
So, Alon, this is something that you and I talked about. This happened over the weekend. This is footage from outside Benjamin Netanyahu's home. We do know that there was a strike that hit his private residence in northern Israel. What do we know about that attack? That happened over the weekend, and there's been some finger pointing since then, and Iran has been in those conversations, correct?
Absolutely. Israel went very much out of its way to try and blame Iran for this. That we've been in a sort of 25-day waiting period between Iran's attack and Israel's retaliation. And during that's a long time when it comes to also the pace of things and the way they develop in the Israel-Hamas war in the last year, and most wars, but specifically this war with so many actors, every day something changes. That's a long time. And one of the things that Israel really wanted to maintain was its justification. Its justification to retaliate, its justification to now hit back at Iran. And then there was this drone attack. 3 drones were launched from Lebanon. 2 were intercepted. 1 got past all the air defenses and hit the prime minister's house, actually hit the bedroom window. According to reports, the prime minister was not there, although there's some conflicting evidence about that. The neighbors said that they saw a convoy leaving, but it was a small convoy. The official report is that Netanyahu was actually not in the house at that time. Israel very much went out of its way to say this was Iran. At first, they said that Iran gave the order to Hezbollah to carry this out. Then there were reports in Israel that, near as I can tell, were not backed with evidence, at least that was published. But there was a lot of reports that were saying that Iranian agents were actually involved in the launching of the drones, which I almost would say would be too convenient for that to be the case. Hezbollah is very capable of firing drones by itself. Israel was trying to substantiate Iran tried to assassinate the prime minister. That gives a much higher level of justification for whatever retaliation you want to make. And there was some speculation that Israel may even be preparing the groundwork for an assassination of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. You tried to assassinate the leader of Israel. Okay, now we're gonna retaliate. Iran, understandably, vehemently denied this. They said they had nothing to do with this. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations gave interviews to lots of different press outlets within the United States and said this was not us. Hezbollah went out of its way to say this was only us. This had nothing to do with Iran. And one of the things I found somewhat humorous, right? You've never seen an organization try to take so much responsibility for a failed assassination attempt, but specifically saying again and again, this was us, this was only us, don't blame anyone else, it was only us. All that was all in order to try to keep Iran out of it, and make sure that this remains between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, did that assassination attempt on Prime Minister Netanyahu change the equation of what Israel was going to retaliate? Israel was saying yes. Israel was saying now the retaliation is going to be harsher. realistically, thus far, I'm not seeing that. Thus far, it does not appear that the nature of the retaliation is not attacking the symbols of power, like again, government buildings or the supreme leader. It's not something that's supposed to be on par to an assassination attempt with the prime minister, at least thus far. And it's just also important to note, Israel does have that capability. We've seen Israel carry out an assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in the heart of Tehran when he was there for the inauguration of the president. So conceivably, and again, of course, Israel never claimed responsibility for that, but I think we can all safely say that Israel carried that out.
Yeah.
So very likely Israel does have the capability to do those kinds of things. The fact that they, at least until now, have not been done in this retaliation means very likely Israel wanted the justification for a harsher retaliation, but is not yet at least carrying it out.
Let's go to some tweets. We're hearing from, this is the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Reports indicate a second wave of strikes is underway with explosions heard in Shiraz. I think we have another one to cycle through as well from the Post itself. Yes, the same thing. A second wave of strikes reported following blasts heard in Shiraz. This is southern Iran. Hal, what can you tell us when we hear about a second wave?
Well, I'm gonna leave it to Alon to talk about Shiraz itself, but I will tell you this. All right, there are a number of things I can think of down south that they would want to hit, but I will say that a second wave of strikes, interesting choice of language, which makes me wonder, was there a first wave that would have hit the Shiraz area if they're calling this a second wave, or is this just a separate strike or wave of strikes that hit down south? That's kind of what I'm wondering. What that tells me is, further south you have these strikes. That's for mission planners. How do you get your aircraft, presuming it's aircraft, or missiles, or drones for that matter? How do you get them there? And you start looking at the geography, and then you start looking at the legs, and you start looking at how far can the aircraft fly without in-flight refueling? Where would you put those tankers? Where would you position them for in-flight refueling? Anytime you do in-flight refueling, it always makes for a much more interesting evolution in terms of strikes. There's just a lot of mission planning considerations that they have to go through. And the further south they go, especially when you start getting much further south, for example, if I hear they hit Bandar Abbas or something like that, that'll definitely get my attention. But the further south you go, the less likely they would have done a circuitous route, the more likely they would have probably done a more direct route, which means they would have flown over Saudi Arabian airspace, potentially UAE airspace as well, going into these areas, depending on where they hit. And so those would be some things that I would think of. That would be some considerations that I have from a strike planning. But again, I kind of point to the language. Second wave of strikes. I'm just not sure if this is another wave that was part of the first wave that just hit a little bit later. That would tell me is that this is not just I hate to use the term one and done, but that this may be going on a lot longer rather than shorter, depending on what it is. But it just depends on what that exactly means. And I'll leave it up to Alon to maybe provide some insight into the Shiraz region itself.
Yeah, Alon, your reaction to A, second wave, and B, Shiraz, the significance of that area.
So I'll say a couple of things. First of all, I agree. I totally agree with Hal that there's a couple of things to learn about the second wave and the fact that it's down south. Second wave, I'm not sure if it indicates that they attacked in Shiraz previously, or if it just means that the IDF is ongoing. That it's not 100 planes carry out a bombing and return back. When Israel attacked the Iraqi nuclear facility in 1981, that's what happened. We had a series of planes come, bomb, return to Israel. This is not that. This appears to be several waves of planes that are coming in maybe from different directions, targeting different things. So that's what I learned from the fact that it's a second wave. And the fact that it's down south, I totally agree. We have to consider airspace. Iran sent a lot of messages to its different neighbors, to Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, all saying, if you let Israel use your airspace, in its retaliation against us, we will attack you back directly. So if, in fact, that is what happened, that has its own potential for escalation in the Middle East, far beyond between Iran and Israel at this point. The choice of Shiraz is very interesting and may also be part of, and this is now total speculation on my part of a deal that was made between Israel and the United States. In Shiraz, as far as I know, there is no established nuclear facility. However, back in April of this year, we're talking about 7 months ago, Iran announced that it was going to begin building a new nuclear facility in Shiraz. It was announced in its council, its nuclear council, and in the official state TV. Very, very possibly, this would have been sort of the compromise between Israel and the United States. The United States saying, don't attack nuclear facilities. Israel wanting to make a message, send a message, and attack nuclear facilities. Maybe, just maybe, attack a nuclear facility that's not actually active. Attack a nuclear facility that's being built. Attack the site that is being targeted for that. Total speculation on my part. I don't know where the attacks happened in Shiraz. Could have been military bases, could have been a million different things. But when I heard Shiraz, the first thing that I remembered is, wait a minute, wasn't there a nuclear facility that was being built there? So very possibly this is just, the way Israel and the United States came to an understanding. Okay, we want to let Israel send the message. We don't want to attack nuclear facilities. Here is a good middle ground, a nuclear facility that's just being built.
It's unfortunate we don't have Shiraz pinned down on this map here, but we see Tehran up there in the northern part of Iran, and then Shiraz would be somewhere in the southern portion of the yellow portion of this map alone. Correct?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Shiraz. I mean, I can't pinpoint with the mouse.
Of course.
And I've often begged you to let's have maps up and interactive things. So one day we'll get there. But one of the things to take away from here is the amount of sort of white lines that we see in sort of western parts of Iran. That is all the different countries. So again, when Hal and I were talking about airspace, you have to travel. We see where Israel is. You have to travel over airspace of different countries in order to get to Iran. Israel does not, at least near as we know, have any air bases that are positioned in areas that are closer to Iran, at least in the southern parts. Israel does have some relations with countries like different countries. There's been all kinds of rumors of different countries, Afghanistan. Again, it's all rumors. So it's hard to know where exactly Israel has air bases, but in areas that are around Iran, and possibly Turkmenistan, possibly Azerbaijan. But that is north of Iran. So no matter what, there had to be some movement of aircraft over airspace of other countries. One of the things that I'm sure will be called into question, and that's one of the reasons that we're going to see the United States heavily deny this, is theoretically, of course, the U.S. has lots of air bases in Qatar. That Qatar is right there. That's that island that you see in the sea that's right across the sea from Shiraz. So that's going to be raised as a question very, very quickly, and I wouldn't be surprised if within a few hours we see both Qatar and the United States denying that any Israeli aircraft was stationed in that country.
Al, what kind of presence does the U.S. have in the region right now?
Oh, it has a very substantial presence in the region. I've had a chance to see a lot of it firsthand for an extended period of time. But we have a few bases in Kuwait. We have a very large, robust air facility in Qatar, which provides a lot of strategic projection capability throughout the region. We have a very significant position in Bahrain. We have a very large naval facility there, along with some other things. And of course, the UAE, we have a presence as well. We have a large naval presence throughout the entire region. We still have forces up in Iraq. We have forces up in Syria, which not in direct connection with this, but certainly from a force protection standpoint, whatever we have in Syria is always a big consideration with whatever's going on throughout the region. So we have forces arrayed there. And then, of course, if you get next to it, we have forces. We have a base in Djibouti, which is in the Horn of Africa, right near the Bab el Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea. I may have spent some time there as well. And then, of course, we have naval forces floating all around in the Persian Gulf, around the Persian Gulf, in the Red Sea, in the Eastern Mediterranean, all over there. So there's a lot of forces, and as you know, there's the report of an F-16 squadron that just arrived just prior to these strikes, very coincidentally and fortuitously. And I don't know where they are. I could make some educated guesses where they are, but I don't want to make educated guesses like that on the air. But I would imagine they'd be in some place where they could be used to the greatest advantage for air defense, probably going after drones, potentially, depending on what they're set up with, potentially some anti-missile capability as well. But that would be my guess. But it's pretty big. Last time I checked, in terms of personnel, it was about 40,000 plus personnel throughout what we call the CENTCOM area of responsibility, which is that Middle Eastern area. That doesn't mean it's 40,000 personnel right there along the Persian Gulf, but in that region, it's 40,000. And I should mention that technically the forces in Djibouti would not count because that's Africa. That's not actually the Central Command area of responsibility. So that's a pretty good sized force. And it's not, and I also should mention, it's a lot of them are more what I would call higher tech forces, or not line infantry forces out there. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about crews on very advanced naval combatants. We're talking about air crews and air and anti-air capability in the region as well. So personnel is not really the best measure of our capabilities. We have a lot of systems, a lot of weapons, a lot of capabilities that go well beyond just the raw count and the number of military personnel that are on the ground.
Alon, I know you've been scouring the international news wires. Anything?
Actually, coming out of Syria, and it's interesting. The Syrian Defense Ministry has said that there's been attacks against several different military sites in the south and central Syria regions. They say that they intercepted a lot of missiles and that the results are still being examined. What we know about the attacks in Syria is that there were initial explosions that were reported in Damascus. Then there were reports of explosions also in Homs and a couple of different regions. What I would usually trust is the various different opposition news sites, that they're usually pretty accurate with what has been attacked. You know, they're not on the side of the government, and they're certainly not on Israel's side either. They sort of like see themselves on the side of Syria, but they're pretty accurate often in saying what are the sites that are attacked and who they belong to. The Voice of Capital, that is one of the Syrian opposition radio stations, said that the attacks in Homs targeted the air defense capabilities, so very much matching what Hal was saying before, that this is, sort of like laying the groundwork to say if this escalates further, we've made our life a lot easier as far as Israel is concerned to continue further escalations. Then there were other reports in another opposition news outlet that said that in the areas of El Khalib, which is in southern Syria, so that does map also what the Syrian Defense Ministry said, there were attacks that specifically targeted radar bases. That is also interesting because there is a lot of cooperation between Iran and Syria officially. There's Iranian troops on the ground in Syria. There's Iranian Revolutionary Guards bases within Syria itself. There's also a lot of cooperation between Iran, Hezbollah, Khatib Hezbollah, the Islamic Defense Brigades, all that are on the border between Iraq and Syria. And they all work together. And having radar capabilities in such a sensitive area, regardless of who's operating it. If it was Syrian, it was Iranian, it was Iranian Revolutionary Guards. If it was one of the militias, for all intents and purposes for Israel, that doesn't matter. That means that that's someone who's going to be reporting back to Iran what is happening. Once again, I'll say the fact that there are more and more attacks being reported in Syria and Iraq, as far as seeing the trajectory of this, I actually see as almost a de-escalatory signal that Israel is sending. It's not carrying out wave after wave of bombings within Iran. It's not continuously, we're not seeing pictures emerging of Tehran going up in flames. Instead, we are seeing Iranian targets. We're seeing a very strong display of force across Iran and across its interests in the Middle East. But we're also seeing, again, that spread. We're seeing, and in Syria and in Iraq, right? It's a different show of force. It's not showing we can strike anywhere we want and how hard we want in Iran. Instead, it's saying we are showing our display of force. We can strike anywhere we want in the Middle East. But as far as the next step, as far as Iran retaliating, a monumental strike in Iran would have almost, quote unquote, forced a retaliation from Iran. A strike that occurs against targets in Syria and in Iraq, and I haven't heard much about the attacks in Iraq. I'm going to look that up right now. Attacks that have been targeting those types of things, Iran can much more afford to spiral down. And one more thing I'll say about that, we have to remember, Iran, much like Israel, much like the United States, it's not one unified force. Even within the Iranian government, we have different voices that are fighting with each other. The president desperately wants this round to end. The president did not want Iran to carry out that initial missile strike. This is a new president. He is not that popular. He is dealing with crippling sanctions and a very weakened economy. And he is, within the realm of Iranian politics, more of a moderate. He wants to focus on the economy. Importantly, the president does not control the military, however. The military is controlled by the supreme leader. The supreme leader is the one who ordered the attack on October 1st. And it is very possible that that is also part of this bargaining happening within the Iranian government. Okay, we launched the attack, but if Israel does not escalate it further, we'll sort of take the punch that Israel gives and not retaliate back. Maybe Israel's going to try to play into that game and say, okay, so we played by the quote-unquote rules of how you set it out, and you don't have to retaliate back. Maybe not, but that's also a factor. Internal Iranian politics are going to be very, very influential with regards to where this goes.
Alon, we have to wrap up here in a moment. I want to end by asking you a question that I asked Hal a moment ago. This is the second time we've seen Israel retaliate against a direct strike from Iran. How did they carry out the last retaliation, and how did they achieve it in such a way that they quelled a further escalation and that we didn't see Iran retaliate to the retaliation? How did Israel pull that off last time?
Completely different. Last time, Israel officially never retaliated. Last time what happened is Iran launched those missiles, and there was a lot of talk about whether Iran in April actually wanted to cause any damage, right? You and I have spoken many times about the fact that we were speaking for hours while the missiles were on their way and the drones were on their way. And it was very clear that Iran was not trying to, obliterate Israel from the map. This was very symbolic that they were doing. Israel's retaliation, again, officially never happened. What did happen is 5 days later, all of a sudden, there were explosions. There were explosions that occurred in Isfahan, in Nantaz, and again, also attacks in Baghdad and also attacks in Damascus. But the importance of the way Israel retaliated then is, according to reports, all of those attacks that occurred in Iran happened from within Iran itself. Drones were launched from within Iran and carried out missile strikes against nuclear facilities. That's sending a huge message. That's saying the Mossad not only is operating in Iran, it has drones ready to launch. So then the message that was sent was much more of a sort of a deterrence message. It's much more of like, be careful, look at our capabilities, be careful. It was not a direct military reaction. And this is something that, again, usually countries don't take responsibility for, just like the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. Israel never took responsibility for. Now, with the second strike that Iran carried out, Israel decided to carry out a direct strike. This is the first time in history that Israel has openly sent planes to attack Iran directly. We saw in the war on April 16th or 14th, it was the first time in history that Iran ever attacked Israel. Again, officially, it is the first time that Israel is carrying out airstrikes against Iran.
We got to leave it there, gentlemen. We appreciate your insight. This is a developing story. We'll keep our audience posted as the night progresses. Hal, Alon, thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.
All right. Let's slide away here. Of course, we've been following, and if our producer Matt can help us, or any of our producers help us, let's cycle through some of the tweets that we've been seeing come in. The Jerusalem Post saying that a second wave of Israeli airstrikes was reported following blasts in Shiraz, which we learned from Alon and Hal is in southern Iran. This is the full statement that the IDF has put out. They say, in response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the state of Israel, right now the IDF is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil. Like every other sovereign country in the world, the state of Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Our defense and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. We will do whatever necessary to defend the state of Israel and the people of Israel. That's from Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. We're going to step away now for a commercial break. We're back in 2 minutes.